In just under an hour, Attorney General William Barr will testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Mueller report, and he's bound to face some tough questioning. Just last night, we learned Special Counsel Robert Mueller told Barr he was frustrated with his 4-page summary of the investigation.
In a letter, Mueller told Barr his message to Congress, quote, did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of Mueller's views on obstruction. He suggested that Barr's comments could cause public confusion and undermine confidence in the investigation. Now, the Justice Department is pushing back, claiming that Mueller said nothing in the Attorney General's March 24th letter was inaccurate or misleading. So Paula Reid is following this from the White House.
The evidence developed by the special counsel is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense.
Attorney General William Barr has publicly defended his decision not to charge the president with obstruction of justice. But according to a letter first reported by the Washington Post, special counsel Robert Mueller complained to the attorney general about how Barr's 4-page summary to Congress did not capture the full context of his work. Mueller wrote to Barr, there is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine a central purpose for which the department appointed the special counsel, to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations. In the letter, Mueller also requested that Barr release the report's introductions and executive summaries to the public. According to the Justice Department, after receiving the letter, Barr called Mueller, his longtime friend and colleague. The Attorney General expressed that he did not want to release the report in piecemeal fashion. The two men agreed to get the full report out with necessary redactions as soon as possible.
Did the Attorney General accurately characterize your positions on conspiracy and obstruction, sir?
We still haven't heard from Mueller directly, and it would take the Justice Department more than 3 weeks to release the redacted report. During that time, the president used Barr's memo to characterize the report's findings.
Frankly, there was no collusion and there was no obstruction.
It was proven very strongly, no collusion, no obstruction, no nothing.
The special counsel completed its report and found no collusion and no obstruction.
Almost 2 weeks after his call with Mueller, Barr denied knowing where the special counsel stood on his characterization of the investigation's findings.
Did Bob Mueller support your conclusion?
I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion.
So for more on this, we are joined by our White House correspondent, Paula Reid, chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill, legal analyst, Rikki Klieman, and CBSN legal contributor, Rebecca Roiphe. Everyone's here. Everyone's on board. So we're going to start with you, Paula. Starting with that letter from Robert Mueller, we understand that there was also a phone call. You mentioned it in your package. What are we learning about that?
Well, once the Attorney General received this letter from his longtime friend and colleague, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, he reached out in a phone call. And we're told during that phone call, which lasted about 15 minutes, Special Counsel Mueller expressed again his concern that the full context of his investigation was not what was coming through in the media coverage. And he encouraged the Attorney General to release Mueller's executive summaries and some other materials immediately to clear up all this confusion. But the Attorney General pushed back. He said he did not want to start releasing information in what he described as a piecemeal fashion. So by the end of the phone call, the two men agreed that they would try to release the redacted report as soon as possible. The Attorney General's office and some members of the special counsel got together to try to speed up that redaction process to release what we eventually saw in that redacted report.
All right, Nancy, over to you. There are some Democrats who are suggesting that the Attorney General misled the public. How do we expect to play into this questioning that we're about to see in just a few hours?
Well, look, Democrats were always planning to grill the Attorney General about his actions in relation to the Mueller report, his decision to release that memo, the contents of that memo, the fact that he held a press conference before he even released the report to the public, and on and on. But this just gives them more grist for the mill because they have long argued and suspected that he was doing what he could to put his thumb on the scale for the president. And now they'll be able to say in this hearing, aha, see, even Robert Mueller himself who is not known to be a partisan figure, had problems with your memo. Beyond that, they are in particular going to ask him about his answers to questions about this about half a month ago. He was here on Capitol Hill testifying, and he was asked point blank whether he felt that Robert Mueller agreed with his conclusions in his 4-page memo to Congress. And he said he didn't know. Well, now we know he did have a pretty good idea of how Robert Mueller felt about his 4-page memo. Robert Mueller, according to this letter he wrote, felt that it was somewhat misleading. And so Democrats are going to go after the Attorney General about that. They had questions all planned last night, but kind of ripped them up and started over again in light of this new bombshell.
So listen, I want to bring in our legal people here, Rebecca and Rikki. So certainly what Nancy mentioned is definitely going to be discussed. Why did you give us the answers that you did the last time you spoke in front of Congress? Why did you tell us you had no idea how Mueller felt? But to sort of the substance of it, the difference between the 4-page summary of the conclusions and what's actually in the Mueller report. Now we know. When you guys read it, did you find that there was a discrepancy? We'll start with you, Rikki.
Well, of course there was a discrepancy. I remember the day that both Rebecca and I were here with you, and we were dealing with the release of the Mueller report. So the 4-page summary, which Attorney General Barr says he would rather not have called a summary, that the 4-page letter that had come out in March really was, in essence, glossing over, if you will, what we found when we looked at all 448 pages. Because when you look at 10 episodes of possible obstruction of justice, it is certainly not a clear-cut issue. So what Attorney General Barr's 4-page letter allowed the president to do was to go out and do his campaign rallies and say that he had been exonerated about both Russian collusion and obstruction. He clearly is not exonerated about obstruction when you actually read the 448-page report, and I think it causes more question for the American public, which is what disturbs Robert Mueller. It's the fact that public confidence in the special counsel and his report was diminished.
So, Rebecca, you know, part of what was included in that 4-page letter was that he was not exonerated. You know, he made sure to include that in there, even though the president decided to go in another direction. So even though William Barr kept that portion in there, do you still think that the letter was misleading?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the central thing that, you know, is a little bit to the side of this drama between Robert Mueller and Bill Barr is Bill Barr's decision to make a call on whether or not there was obstruction of justice. To me, that is central. And he's claiming in his opening statement that he was obligated, professionally obligated to do so. And I seriously disagree with that. I think that Robert Mueller's decision not to make that decision because of the DOJ policy not to indict a sitting president is absolutely right. He just wanted to get the facts to the people who are supposed to hold the president accountable. So I think that's going to be central to the questioning here and really should be. The other thing I think that was a little bit misleading here is that in that summary, he said part of the reason why he decided that he hadn't obstructed justice is because there was no underlying crime and therefore no motivation. But as Rikki said, when you read that full report, I mean, even the volume on Russian, let's call it coordination, collusion, contacts, the contacts with the Russian. There's plenty of motivation to obstruct justice, and it doesn't have to be to obstruct justice. It doesn't have to be that you're trying to cover up a crime that you've committed. You can be guilty of obstruction of justice with all sorts of motivations, and there's plenty of motivation in there. And I think Barr really did not do justice to the report when he said, well, he didn't commit the underlying crime of conspiracy, and therefore that went into our decision that he didn't obstruct justice. So that, to me, seems like one of the things that would seem misleading to Mueller.
Interestingly enough, Rebecca, the president disagrees with you because Paula, the president, just tweeted this: no collusion, no obstruction. Besides, Rebecca, How can you have obstruction when not only there was no collusion by Trump in parentheses, but the bad actions were done by the other side? The greatest con job in the history of American politics. So that's the president tweeting about this just moments ago. Paula, obviously, although he keeps repeating no collusion, no obstruction, he's been obsessive over this on Twitter and in front of you, the media, when he appears before you. So what kind of impact are you hearing from the White House that this may have on the president?
Vlad, it's interesting, this tweet. I saw it as well. It's sort of an expanded defense. Went from no collusion, no obstruction to this whole caveat, which was, well, besides, even if you had obstruction, can you really have obstruction if there's no underlying crime?
That's really strange.
It's again, they've had to sort of modify their defense because it's clear that this revelation, the fact that the special counsel was concerned about how his work was being characterized, this is really going to undercut the White House's argument that the president was completely cleared. And of course, as our two legal experts just laid out, there's a lot of evidence in this report laying out at least 10 different instances in which the president sought to interfere in this investigation. And in many instances, he was just stopped by other people, including his former White House counsel, Don McGahn, from pursuing what he wanted to do. But this argument about whether or not you need a crime underlying an obstruction offense, this is something where people inside the Justice Department who worked on this, they believe that you do need an underlying crime, but they agree under intense questioning by myself and other reporters that yes, there have been instances where people have been charged for less and without an underlying crime. Another one of the ways that this will really impact the Trump administration is this will really cast further doubt over the Justice Department, which does a lot more than just this Russia investigation, including helping the president with his upcoming litigation on the Affordable Health Care Act, these asylum initiatives. One of the main reasons that it was put forth that Republicans were so supportive of Attorney General William Barr is because he's a former Attorney General. He seemed like someone from central casting who wouldn't sort of bow down to the president or do his bidding and would sort of bring things at main justice back to business as usual. But right now, it appears that this just bolsters these concerns about whether or not William Barr is representing the American people or whether he's trying to protect the president. And in some ways, especially at that press conference, people were arguing, especially Democrats, that even sounded at times like the president's defense attorney.
Yeah, it's certainly people have said that. So, Nancy, Republicans have defended Barr. Now that the Mueller report is out, many Republicans have said they just want to move on. You already know what the conclusions are. Let's go on to something else. But I wonder if you think that this news of this letter, that Mueller was upset about the 4-page summary, if that's going to factor into any of their questioning, or because after all, I mean, William Barr essentially, I don't know if you want to say lied, but certainly misled them when he was questioned the first time. Are they going to sort of ignore that and sort of follow whatever line of questioning they're choosing, which will have nothing to do with the Mueller report?
I think they will ignore it for the most part for two reasons. Number one, they know that Democrats are going to do the job of questioning Barr about that for them. Republicans don't need to go into it because they know the Democrats have that covered. Number two, these Republicans have been so emphatic that, as you pointed out, Anne-Marie, they want to move on. Lindsey Graham is the chair of this committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he said yesterday, point blank, I'm done with the Mueller report. So as far as he's concerned, it's a closed book. There are no charges. It's time to move on to something else. So he may ask Barr about his handling of the release. He may ask Barr about the origins of the Mueller investigation, which Republicans have always had some suspicions about. But beyond that, I don't expect Lindsey Graham and the other 10 Republicans on this committee to really grill the Attorney General. They have actually praised his transparency. They say, look how quickly he handed the redacted report over to the public. He did it in a few weeks. He wants all the truth to be out there. So that's the argument that Republicans are making to try to counteract this Democratic claim that Barr actually should resign in the wake of this new controversy.
Rebecca and Rikki, the Attorney General, before he was nominated this time around as Attorney General, was seen as someone who was a respected legal scholar. But given some of the things that have been reported, I wonder, could he, and is he expecting that the questions that he may receive from lawmakers today in the Senate and specifically tomorrow in the House could put him in any kind of legal jeopardy, to the point that Nancy made about perhaps having to resign?
Well, I think he would be naive if he didn't anticipate that the Democrats, or many of them, will call for his resignation as a result of this discrepancy with the letter that came from Robert Mueller and his work. However, if we take a breath and we look at this calmly, we have to remember two things. Number one is these types of hearings are show hearings.
Right.
That is, the Republicans get to do their thing. They'll probably talk a lot about spying, which William Barr was the person to use that word after President Trump, and the origins in the investigation. And the Democrats, remember here, you have some presidential candidates in the Democrats who have shown in the past that they are very good questioners.
Amy Klobuchar.
Amy Klobuchar comes to mind right away, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, people who we have seen in the past in the Judiciary Committee or other committees who have gone forth and who can be very, very aggressive questioners and who will gin it up. So we are really looking, to me, and I think I'll be curious also as the day goes on what Rebecca has to say, what is the goal here of both sides?
Sort of thinking.
What's the goal?
Right. We'll have to see. It'll be interesting. It plays out in just about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So, let's thank our group of, Paula,
Nancy, Rikki, and
Rebecca. Thank you all.